Eridu is an archaeological site in southern Mesopotamia, modern-day Governorate, Iraq. Eridu was long considered the earliest city in southern Mesopotamia and is still today argued to be the oldest city in the world. 1. Located 12 kilometers southwest of Eridu was the southernmost of a conglomeration of Sumerian cities that grew about temples, almost inside of one another. These buildings were made out of mud brick and built on top of one another. With the temples growing upward and the village grew outward and larger, a city was built. In Sumerian mythology, Eridu was originally the home of Enki, later known by the Akkadians as Ea, who was considered to have founded the city. His temple was called Absu, as Enki was believed to live in Absu, an aquifer from which all life was believed to stem. History of research. The site at Tel Abyesharain, near Basra, was initially excavated by John George Taylor in 1855, R. Campbell Thompson in 1918, and H. R. Hall in 1919. Excavation there resumed from 1946 to 1949 under Fuad Safar and Seddon Lloyd of the Iraqi Directorate General of Antiquities and Heritage. These archaeological investigations showed that, according to Oppenheim, eventually the entire South lapsed into stagnation, abandoning the political initiative to the rulers of the northern cities, and the city was abandoned in 600 BC. Prominence. Eridu, also transliterated as Eridug, could mean mighty place or guidance place. In the Sumerian king list, Eridu is named as the city of the first kings. The king list continues: in Eridu, Alilim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Ulungur ruled for 36,000 years. 2 kings, they ruled for 64,800 years. Then Eridu fell and the kingship is taken to Bad Tabira. The king list gave particularly long rules to the kings who ruled before a great flood occurred, and shows how the center of power progressively moved from the south to the north of the country. Adapa, a man of Eridu, is depicted as an early culture hero. Identified with Yuan, a half-human creature from the sea, Ab-Golu, from Ab equals water, Gao equals big, Lu equals man. He was considered to have brought civilization to the city during the time of King Alilim. In Sumerian mythology, Eridu was the home of the Absu temple of the god Enki, the Sumerian counterpart of the Akkadian water god Ea. Like all the Sumerian and Babylonian gods, Enki, Ea began as a local god, who came to share, according to the later cosmology, with Anu and Enlil, the rule of the cosmos. His kingdom was the sweet waters that lay below earth. Sumerian Ab equals water, Zu equals far. The stories of Inanna, goddess of Ruk, describe how she had to go to Eridu in order to receive the gifts of civilization. At first Enki, the god of Eridu, attempted to retrieve these sources of his power, but later willingly accepted that Ruk now was the center of the land. This seems to be a mythical reference to the transfer of power northward. Babylonian texts talk of the creation of Eridu by the god Marduk as the first city, the holy city, the dwelling of the other gods, delight. In the court of Assyria, special physicians trained in the ancient lore of Eridu, far to the south, foretold the course of sickness from signs and portents on the patient's body, and offered the appropriate incantations and magical resources as cures. History. According to the Sumerian king list, Eridu was the first city in the world. The opening line reads, Namlugal and ta edaba, Iriduki Namlugal la. When kingship from heaven was lowered, the kingship was in Eridu. In Sumerian mythology, it was said to be one of the 5 cities built before the deluge occurred. Eridu appears to be the earliest settlement in the region, founded ca. 5400 BC, close to the Persian Gulf near the mouth of the Euphrates River. Because of accumulation of silt at the shoreline over the millennia, the remains of Eridu are now some distance from the Gulf at Abu Shahrain in Iraq. Excavation has shown that the city was originally founded on a virgin sand dune site with no previous occupation. According to Gwendolyn Leake, Eridu was formed at the confluence of 3 separate ecosystems, supporting 3 distinct lifestyles, that came to an agreement about access to fresh water in a desert environment. The oldest agrarian settlement seems to have been based upon intensive subsistence irrigation agriculture derived from the Sumer culture to the north, characterized by the building of canals, and mud brick buildings. The fisher-hunter cultures of the Arabian littoral were responsible for the extensive middens along the Arabian shoreline, and may have been the original Sumerians. They seem to have dwelt in reed huts. The third culture that contributed to the building of Eridu were the Semitic-speaking nomadic herders of herds of sheep and goats living in tents in semi-desert areas. All 3 cultures seem implicated in the earliest levels of the city. The urban settlement was centered on an impressive temple complex built of mud brick, within a small depression that allowed water to accumulate. Kate Fielding reports the earliest village settlement, c. 5000 BC, had grown into a substantial city of mud brick and reed houses by c. 2900 BC, covering 8 to 10 hectares, 20-25 acres. Malawan writes that by the Ubad period, it was as an unusually large city of an area of approximately 20-25 acres, with a population of not less than 4,000 souls. Jacobson describes that Eridu was for all practical purposes abandoned after the Ubad period, although it had recovered by early dynastic II, as there was a massive early dynastic II palace, 100 meters in each direction, partially excavated there. Ruth Whitehouse called it a major early dynastic city. By c. 2050 BC the city had declined. There is little evidence of occupation after that date. 18 superimposed mud brick temples at the site underlie the unfinished ziggurat of Amar Sen, c. 2047 to 2039 BC. The finding of extensive deposits of fish bones associated with the earliest levels also shows a continuity of the Abzu cult associated later with Enki and Da. This apparent continuity of occupation and religious observance at Eridu provide convincing evidence for the indigenous origin of Sumerian civilization. Eridu was abandoned for long periods, before it was finally deserted and allowed to fall into ruin in the 6th century BC. The encroachment of neighboring sand dunes, and the rise of a saline water table, set early limits to its agricultural base. So in its later Neo-Babylonian development, Eridu was rebuilt as a purely temple site, in honor of its earliest history. Possible location of Tower of Babel. The Egyptologist David Rohl has conjectured that Eridu, to the south of Ur, was the original Babel and site of the Tower of Babel, rather than the later city of Babylon. Other scholars have discussed at length the number of additional correspondences between the names of Babylon and Eridu. Historical tablets state that Sargon-Nebuchad, ca. 2300 BC, dug up the original Babylon and rebuilt it near Akkad, though some scholars suspect this may in fact refer to the much later Assyrian king Sargon II.